Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second live Google Hangout for the Milwaukee Art Museum Hangout with Art online course. I'm Chelsea Kelly, the Manager of Digital Learning here at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and we are so thrilled that you're all tuning in for our live Hangout about art and story with Carole E. Barrowman, who, as you can see, is here today. Hello, Carole.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We're so thrilled you're here. So before we dive into our conversation with Carole, I want to give a quick housekeeping, a little background on what this is all about if you're tuning in for the first time. So this is part of an online course called Hangout with Art. It's a massive open online course, or MOOC, that we developed here at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And it's for folks from around the world to get more comfortable looking at art and going to museums. So for the past few months, participants in the course have been completing lots of activities to think about art and museums in new ways. And we're now in the second part of our course, which is a series of live hangouts with experts who use art in their work but don't work in museums. So we're trying to show lots of ways that you can bring art into your life and work. So we're excited that Carole is here to share that part of her life with us today. So in our live talk today, some housekeeping. The great thing about Google Hangouts, in addition to us being live talking to you via video, is that you can ask questions of us. So if you hover over your screen, you should be able to click a button that says Q&A, and we invite you to click on that button and ask us questions at any time during this Hangout, and we will answer your questions live. And you can also vote for questions that you'd like to see answered. Just click that +1 button and we'll know that it's a popular question that we want to answer right away. So please do ask questions. We'd like this to be as conversational as possible. And before we get started, I do want to thank the Google Art Project, who's our partner for this course, as well as the Google Jumpstart Your Course grant, which funded this project. So today I want to introduce Carole Barrowman. We are going to talk about art and story with Carole. And Carole is an author as well as a professor at Alverno College here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we asked her to be a part of the course because of her own passion for art and art history, and of course the innovative ways that she's using artworks in her writing. So Carole is the author of the Hollow Earth series. I have the first book here, ta-da. And she wrote these books along with her brother John Barrowman. And the series is about two twins whose imaginations allow them to animate themselves into works of art. So Carole will explain a little more about that, and she's going to do a quick introduction, and then again, feel free to ask questions. So Carole, take it away.
Thank you, thank you. I think since this is art and story, I'm going to start with a little story that sort of influenced what my writing. When my kids were little, we walked to school in our neighborhood. We live in a city suburb, and so we wanted our kids to walk to school. And when they were really little, kindergarten age, when we get to school in the mornings and it was really cold out, this is Wisconsin after all, winters are pretty cold. And I would get my daughter and son and some of their friends, and I'd say, "Ooh, let's build a bonfire." And they'd be like, "Well, we can't build a bonfire. We're on school grounds." And I'd say, "Well, let's gather some imaginary twigs, and we'll make an imaginary bonfire." And so every morning we'd get the kids would go and they'd pretend they were gathering twigs. We'd make this little bonfire, and we'd warm our hands at it, and other kids would come over and they'd see we were pretending that we had a fire, and somebody would want to do pretend marshmallows. And this lasted probably up through, I don't know, maybe second or third grade. And then about third grade in the winters, when I'd walk with the kids, I couldn't get them to do it. They would be like, "Oh, that's just dumb. Mom, are you going to do the bonfire again?" And in the back of my head, I was always struck by what happens. Why, as kids move into sort of their teenage years, do they stop imagining in a way that's childlike and wonderful, and in a way that those of us who are still connected with art and literature and stories and teaching still do, I think. And so always in the back of my head was the idea, man, if we could just keep our imaginations and think about them as our sort of superpowers, that we could unleash them when we wanted to do something wonderful. And so I think maybe that was always at the back of our minds when John and I started brainstorming about what we wanted these kids to do. And as you said in the introduction, so what they're able to do is when they draw, their drawings come to life. And that also allows them to move in and out of art in very exciting ways. And so what happens across the series of books, the twins discover that they are actually part of this ancient order of artists known as animari, and those artists, it turns out, have always been able to do this with their art. And you can see from the covers of the books that there's some scenes from both Hollow Earth, which is the first book, and Bone Quill, which is our second one. And they use art to help them sort of solve the mystery of their past and who they really are as these special children with these powers. And as it turns out, throughout the books, you discover that there are actually some real artists who were animari and who had this power. And so what's really been cool for me as a writer and a researcher is that I've worked in real artists into the book who have had these power, because I bet you didn't know that Van Gogh was an animari. And so Van Gogh is in there, and Monet, and there are some other famous artists who work themselves into the story, partly because I love their art and John loves their art, and also because one of the goals I think we've always had with these books is lots of kids and young adults have favorite authors and great books that they like. And I've always thought, now, and sort of back to my kids with the bonfire story, wouldn't it be really cool if kids, as they grow up, can always tell someone, ooh, my favorite artist is. And so right along with their favorite books and singers and musicians, they could also say, and I have a favorite artist. I mean, how cool would that be? So that's, I guess, my hidden goal of this series, to have kids be able to say that, and maybe even know what museums they could go to see some of those pieces. So then I thought maybe what I would do, just to give people a flavor of the book, is read a little section from the first book. And let me just set a little context. The very first painting that the twins animate themselves into, just because they're mischievous, is a painting that's in the National Gallery in London. And it's George Seurat's Bathers at Essignières. And it's this massive, big, pointillist piece with a little boy in a red hat, and so the children draw themselves into this painting, and basically it unravels their secret past, and people chase them to Scotland, where they find out that they have a grandfather, and they live with him in this ancient monastery. And there's some art studios in this monastery, and when they get up there, their mom disappears. So the children are looking for their mother. They have no idea what's happened to her, and they break into her studio on this island in Scotland, where she has all sorts of pieces of art that she's painted. And they begin to look for her, and as they do, some strange things begin to happen in this art studio. And one of the really cool parts about this scene is one of my favorite paintings from the Milwaukee Art Museum that my kids and I loved when they were young, and I take them to the museum. I've managed to work this into the book, so I hope you'll enjoy this. So, and since the kids are Scottish, I'm going to read this in my Scottish accent. So this is a little excerpt to give you a little taste of Hollow Earth. After about 20 minutes in Sandy's studio, Em lost hope. A dark shadow seemed to cover her mind, and she sensed Matt's thoughts as clearly as her own, spiraling into despair beside her. They'd never find their mum this way. She was gone, maybe forever. A spider the size of a cat suddenly punched out of a painting of the woman with the funky hat. Leaping over 2 pots of paint and scampering down the table leg, the hairy black spider scuttled across the floor toward the twins. Em screamed, "Ah!" Grabbing a stool from under the table, Matt flipped it over and slammed it on top of the creature. The spider exploded in a burst of black charcoal. Em screamed again as a swarm of spiders spewed from the woman's hat as if it was an egg sack. With bulbous middles and bulging eyes, they streamed across the table, washing onto the floor in thick waves. Next, a thick ropey vine from one of the exotic plant pictures untangled itself from its roots, slithered across the floor, and wrapped itself around Em's ankles. It tightened its grip, pulling Em to her knees. 3 bigger spiders leapt from the table edge. Landing on Matt's shoulder, they dug their legs into his neck, their hair scratching his skin like wire brushes. Matt batted them off with his hands, filling the room with more clouds of black charcoal. Zach ran to help Em as still more spiders cascaded from the painting. By this time, Em had curled herself into a ball, covering her head with her arms, howling as one spider after another landed on her, tangling their legs in her thick hair and nipping at her skin. You both hate spiders. You're doing this to yourself. You're so upset about your mum, your imaginations are running wild. You're losing control. Em was now blanketed in angry spiders, but they kept on coming. I can't stop them, she screamed. Help me get her outside, Matt gasped at Zach. And ignoring the spiders scampering up their own arms, the 2 boys tried to pull Em toward the door. They didn't get very far. The vine was still holding her tight, squeezing the circulation from her legs. Zach darted to the spot where they dumped their wet raincoats. He rifled in Matt's pockets until he found the sketch pad and pencil. Matt was cloaked in spiders too, but he was valiantly keeping as many from his sister as he could, booting them across the room when they landed near her. The air was choked with charcoal dust. I can't breathe. Draw something, Zach shoved the sketch pad into Matt's hands. Draw something or she's going to suffocate. Ignoring the hundreds of spiders thickening across his shoulders, Matt drew as fast as he knew how. He had to save his sister. And one of the things that I loved about this painting was when my kids first saw it. We're not big cat people in our family, and so they saw the cat first, but my son was the one who said, she looks like she's got a spider's nest on her head, and that just stuck with me.
It's almost like I don't want you to stop the excerpt there. What happens next?
You'll have to buy the book or read it from the library and see what Matt draws to save his sister.
Indeed, and I love that that there's so much imagination in the way that you've interpreted this artwork. Working here at the museum, I see that piece a lot. I think I've told you before, and folks who are watching who might know me in real life know I'm a huge cat person, love cats, so I love that painting for totally different reasons than why it stuck with you. So it's so fun to hear a totally different kind of interpretation of that painting, and I think that's really something that is so inspiring about what you do in the books, is to think about art and art history and artists and museums, because museums are also a setting for a lot of the action in the books as well, to think about these places and these objects in totally new ways. Last week, we actually spoke with an artist, Reginald Baylor, and he talked about using art and other like music and other things as inspiration for his work. And I think it's so cool to think about how works of art, like the woman with the cat that you used for this example, can spark such kind of tense moments in the story and important moments in the story itself.
Well, and one of the really exciting things is, I like to use the art as the beginnings of a point that sort of bursts out into other aspects. For example, in that very first scene, when the children draw themselves into the to the George Seurat painting, one of the things that has always struck me about that painting is it's clearly in industrial France. It's Paris, right? They're in the Seine, and I think most people have a vision of the Seurat painting, even if the one they know is Sunday in the Park with George. It's part of that similar landscape that he drew. But for me, one of the wonderful things is I have to imagine, well, what is a child, what is a 13-year-old going to see when he or she looks at that painting? And I remembered, because we did with my children, every time we went to a new city, or even John and I, anytime we travel, we always go to the art museum. It's one of the very first places that we go. And so one of the things that the kids are often struck by is, why is this little boy in the red hat, which if you look at the Seurat painting, he's the focal point of this particular one, why is he in the water? And why is he working? And isn't he too young to work? And the kinds of questions that we might have more about form and how Seurat, crafted this. Kids want to know the stories. And I've always been really aware of that, and for me, it's one of the most wonderful things. I don't always know the exact way a piece of art was created, but I try to help young people understand that there's a story here, and sometimes it has to do with the artist, and sometimes it's completely embedded in the text. And then the other thing is, there's a wonderful little puppy dog in that painting that almost every adult misses the first few times they look at it. And children see that dog first. And then, as the kids say in the book, what's going to happen to this dog when they all go back to work? Because they're actually bathing on break from the factories in this painting. So to continue to use art in this way, I think it's allowing even the adult in me to keep my wonder going for a lot of those pieces.
Absolutely. And I think going to a museum with a friend or a family member, especially with someone who's of a different generation than you can see, or even someone who has less or more experience going to museums or looking at art than you do, you can see so many new things through somebody else's eyes. And I think, a lot of the times in the museum, museums helpfully have labels, which are awesome and tell us lots of, good facts about the piece, but it can be just as fun sometimes to challenge yourself to look at a work of art before you look at the label and kind of imagine what the story or the narrative might be, to your point. And that's something anyone can do when they go to a museum as a way to kind of get into the artwork more. And a lot of the times the artwork might have a specific story that, we've done research on and we are pretty sure that's what it's about. But other times we don't quite know what the artist was after. So it can be, just as useful to kind of include your own interpretation into the mix as well.
One of my favorite things to do, because I regularly bring my students from Alverno down to the museum, and one of my favorite things to do is to actually cover. There's I don't know if the painting is still up, but it's a painting of a mother with her child, and it looks very angelic, and the child, the mother's expression on her face is just. It's just very potent and full of just the sheer joy of this child. And then so I asked my students to actually write a little caption or a title for this painting. And then I tell them that this painting was created because the baby had died. And this mother wanted this painting as a reminder, because of course there was no photography at the time. Well, all of a sudden you realize that it's an expression of joy in her face, but it's also full of incredible melancholy, and it's a wonderful lesson on interpretation just to have that moment where they realize, oh, and then the painting takes on so much more depth for them.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great example, because I think a lot of the times when we think about, a work of art having one correct interpretation or one correct story, even if we do have some research, as you were explaining, about a piece that can tell us some more of the facts behind it, it doesn't mean that the interpretations that we bring to it are any less important, or that our imagination and the way that we might want to be inspired by a work are any less valid. So I think that's such a great point about not being discouraged if you're confused by a label, or you maybe even disagree with the label. I think that's totally okay. Use it as a conversation starter with whoever you're with, or even if you're solo, use it as like a writing prompt. Do some stream of consciousness writing.
And actually the same thing happens with writers too, because my daughter is actually reading. She's a third grade teacher in Minneapolis, and she's reading this book with her class. And so, of course, at the end of each chapter, she poses a question to them to see if they're paying attention. And she's also calls up all the art as they go through it. So they're also paralleling their reading with the various paintings that are in the story. But at one point she had this little boy said, I bet your mom meant for us to know that, and I don't even remember what the point was. It was something to do with one of the pieces. I bet she really meant for this to be the way it is. And Claire, my daughter, knowing that I didn't really intend that, said, well, I don't know if she did or not. Maybe we should ask her. And so they asked me, and I told them, I said, if that's how you saw this scene, I think that's wonderful. I didn't even think of that, and now I'm going to tell people that's what I thought. You know, and so it's like, yeah, once I hand over this book, and I think the same thing is true with pieces of art, once it's out there, then your privilege is to be able to shape some meaning from it. And you don't have to understand the history at all. That's my whole point with some of these paintings. Another painting in the first book is Monet's the bridge, the Thames at Westminster, and there's I don't want to give any spoilers, but at one point the children figure out that they're able to do some other pretty cool time travel things with art. And if you look at that painting now, I have young people who send me emails saying, is that really the twins on Monet's jetty? And oh, yes it is. Of course it is. Because now when they see this painting, they have a bigger story associated with it. And for me, that is so cool, because they think now that those little figures that Monet painted into the jetty over the Thames might just be Matt and M. Calder.
I love that. Yeah, and it's so cool that folks are going to look at these works of art in person thanks to your books. That's really amazing. And by the way, before I forget, I will post links to the works that Carole's mentioning on our Google Plus page so that afterward you can go and check them out and see what they look like. So we actually have our first question, which I want to bring into our conversation. So Mary asks, was there a particular painting that inspired you to write the series?
Wow. Actually, there was. And I think on my slideshow that if we could pull it up, it's a slide of me at the Art Museum doing a presentation. And I have some children around me. I love to visit art museums and work with young writers and artists. And if we could see one of those pictures, that it has a copy of me talking to a young artist about a painting with a boy that's leaping out of a frame. And actually, this was a painting that my brother John and I saw on vacation at a show. I believe it was in a museum in Glasgow, and it was maybe traveling. Either that or we saw a replica of it. And I think it's maybe my third or fourth slide in. And it is...
and we'll pull that up in a second.
Yeah. It's a painting of a boy, and he's crawling out of a frame. I believe it's a Spanish painting. I'm not gonna. Chelsea can make sure you get all the full citations for it. There it is. You can see me lurking behind it. We saw this painting, and the expression on this young boy's face is so incredible. His eyes are huge, and all my brother and I could think about is, oh my gosh, can you imagine having this painting in your room and this kid's eyes following you? And then we started saying to ourselves, what is he really trying to get away from? What possibly could be in the darkness behind here? What could be in this blackness that he's trying to escape from? And again, I think this painting it's always been one I've liked. It's one I have a little card on my bookshelf of it, and I've just really been struck by it. And I think it was probably one of the things that inspired us to think about our main characters being able to move in and out of art because of this painting. Of course, the artist meant it as an allegory, didn't really intend it as to be a real child escaping from something in the darkness behind the painting. I think it's actually called escaping criticism. So it's a much more sort of an adult allegory, but I use this painting when I work with young people, and I get such good stories from them. They love to tell me what this little boy is thinking and feeling, and you look at that painting and you think, oh, it's just a boy. But they recognize that he's in rags, so therefore he's probably really poor. They recognize that he is that he's very thin. You can see his chest, his rib cage, and so they can infer that he's very hungry. So I often have children say to me, oh, he's probably trying to climb out for a sandwich or try to get something to eat. But it's such a wonderful painting, and yet on the surface it seems like there's really not that much going on. But I have to say this was one of the first paintings that really inspired us to go with this series.
And sometimes that's all it takes, is that kind of one spark of like, oh, to make it click into place. And then it seems clear from the way you've described the series too that there's so much in your life that led you to, you know, wanting to incorporate something art related, and your, you know, love for museums for such a long time. And then once you have that spark to kind of like build it all in, that it just kind of came together so beautifully in these novels.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And it is always very fun. This time around, working on the next book in the series, one of the things that I actually started with this time was paintings. We started with the George Seurat because we knew that had some personal meaning to John and I. When John was first, as many people, as you may know, John worked a lot in the West End in London on musical theater. And when I would visit him over there, when he would do matinees, I would often hang out in the National Gallery because it's right in London. The National Gallery is very close to the theater district. And I would just wander in the first floor of the National Gallery and wait for him till he got done with his matinee, and he'd come meet me, we'd go eat. And for some reason we kept gathering in front of the George Seurat painting with the little boy in the red hat. So it was kind of a personal connection to both of us that we decided we'd open the series with that. And another series of paintings that we just love, that were a little too dark for the first series, but we're making the children a little older in this next one. So we're doing a Bosch, a Hieronymus Bosch painting is really at heart. His triptych of the Garden of Earthly Delights is really at the heart of the book, but not for the reason I think many readers might expect. And so you'll have to wait and see what's the secret buried in that painting that the twins are going to have to figure out.
I cannot wait. But I want to make a connection for those of you who have been participating in the course. I just want to make a parallel between what Carole was talking about with works of art that really have such a personal meaning to a person. So a lot of the activities that we've been doing in the course are making personal connections with works of art and kind of promoting ways that you can find your way in and to have an artwork mean something to you. So I think it's a really nice connection that this is something that you've done, Carole, and has, you know, helped inspire your writing. And it's also something that we can, you know, take from these different activities in the course too.
Well, and one of the other great activities, just as since you brought that up, that I use in my classroom that I think is a wonderful thing to do too is there's a very famous Audens poem, and it's based on it's a poem about the fall of Icarus, and it's a Bruegel painting. And I love to have my students look at that painting and tell its story and then read what Bruegel saw, because of course he really focuses on what's going on in the world around this painting as Icarus is falling from the sun. No one else notices. The world is going on around this poor young man as he falls from the sky. And it takes 2 or 3 viewings of that painting for some of my students to even notice little Icarus falling into the ocean. And so it's a wonderful way to introduce metaphor, even an allegory, in a classroom too.
Awesome. Yeah, and a lot of the kind of tools that artists use in their paintings, like metaphor, allegory, a lot of those tools are identical to what writers use, and it really gets at that kind of visual relationship between reading and writing, and making art, that, you know, good readers visualize what they see in their mind's eye as they read, and writers do the same thing. So it's just this nice kind of connection. We do have some more questions. Good. So here is a quick one from Anne-Marie and Jason, kind of 2 names. Who is your publisher?
Oh, all right. Well, in the UK, we are published by Michael Amara, and I love the title of this. Our third book was published by Head of Zeus Publishing
Fitting.
in London. Simon & Schuster publishes the series here under the Aladdin, the middle grade imprint. Yeah.
Great, wonderful, thank you. And then another question from Jason and Anne-Marie. In your experience, do children prefer a particular kind of painting? Do they like the grotesque over the romantic, for example?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we tried to do in the book is have a variety of different styles. But I have to say I stayed more with sort of traditional narrative paintings where it is a little easier, partly because this was middle grade and we were introducing the students, or the readers, to a number of different pieces. But there's a painting at the heart of the series that's actually a made-up painting that we imagined that is very surreal and very impressionistic, and it's all about colors, and it's sort of the narrative is not easy to explicate from it, and so I think we've tried to work in a little bit of all of those. As you probably can tell, I'm a big fan of history paintings, and so I've got a lot of Bruegel that I've tried to work in. There's a wonderful scene where the children try to make a little extra money by making people think that they're doing a little show with slides, and actually they're animating a Bruegel painting, and it causes a bit of chaos in their lives, let me say. So I tend to be attracted to those kinds of paintings that young people just might not have seen very much. But I think I don't know that we made a conscious decision. The first couple of books were mostly out of our experiences and what we loved. This next book, we're building on much darker pieces of art, because the challenge with writing to middle grade is really the focus of the series, but it's 10 and above, 12 and above, given the complexity of the story. But I think one of the things we had to be really aware of is when somebody Googles the paintings, what else comes up? And will you see other things? And there's a William Blake painting that I think is particularly scary at the heart of the painting, and also a couple of paintings that are very Gothic. And so even if you are looking at just the paintings that are in the book, I'm hoping that that readers expand out and see, well, what else is there in that genre? That's a great question. I don't really know the answer to that.
I think that is a great question, and I might even jump into, as someone who's worked as a museum educator for a long time now, it's a great question, and I think there really is not necessarily an answer to it, because all kids are so different, and just like all adults are so different in their interests. I think it is interesting I think sometimes conversations happen a little more easily with kids around narrative works.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily mean someone isn't going to be drawn to a very abstract or even like a 1 or 2 color piece, or modern work of art. So I think it totally depends on the person. I think often when I give tours to kids, they might relate it to something they're learning about in school or something that happened in their life. It's almost a very kind of natural compulsion to try to think, okay, how can I relate this to me? So that's kind of fun to know what they're learning about and show them works that, even if it's not necessarily something about the time period in history that they're learning about, but just something more abstract that might remind them of like a mood in a book that they were reading. It really varies what the hook is, but that's a great question.
I was thinking too, is I also like to have the opportunity to introduce them to things that they might not normally look at. And one of the things that is at the heart of this first trilogy is an illustrated manuscript, and a bestiary, which is a book of beasts. It used to be sort of an alphabet book from the Middle Ages, and it was used to tell stories and fables and morals and teach values to young people at during that time period, because of course only a very few people were literate, so art was an important way to increase and encourage good behavior and teach morals and values and so on. And so when I do my presentations in schools, I spend a lot of time looking with them at illustrated manuscripts and the marvelous beasts that are part of those. And it's my favorite thing out of that is kids might never have seen an illustrated manuscript, but their favorite thing to draw for me and send me. And I believe towards the end of some of my slides that I've sent, you can throw up a couple of pictures also that children have sent me from drawing their beasts for me that they think would be part of a bestiary. And I have lots of classrooms that are making bestiaries out of reading for these books. And so you can go to my website and see some of these, but there are just, look at this, an ugly werewolfosaurus. How about that thing? They are just marvelous. And so I try to encourage children to imagine. This one is one of my particular favorites because when I ask them to imagine a beast, since beasts in medieval bestiaries always were used to teach a moral or what happens to you if you behave badly, you can see that there's a poor person in the stomach of this Anticribria, and being dissolved by the stomach's acid quickly or slowly, depending on how bad you have been, according to the creators of this wonderful piece of art. And this one is also another one. I think this is from a 4th grader in Minneapolis, and she sort of, there's a peryton or a flying stag as part of the book, and this young woman has created a hawk, saber-toothed tiger, white-tailed deer. Isn't that awesome?
That one's my favorite. I like all of its powers.
Yes, yes. And then this is the midnight, and its powers is that it shoots plasma out of its mouth, but it can move in the shadows, which is, of course, why it's called the midnight. Isn't that? I love this one too. So you can see a whole bunch of these on my webpage. But if you are working with children, one of the things that sort of back to the question, I think I know. Look at that one. One of the really cool things about these is most of these kids had never really heard or done much with medieval illuminated manuscripts, and so now they have a little bit more added to their art vocabulary,
which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
So we have some great follow-up questions
Good.
about these kind of stories and artworks experiences that I think both of us have probably done a lot of in our time. So Barbara asks, what size group of children would be optimum for this story approach? In other words, is there an upper limit to allow for interaction?
Wow, that I have done this kind of approach where getting kids to tell me stories from art with 400 people, with 400 3rd and 4th and 5th graders in Ohio at a gifted and talented program. I've also done it in a museum with 6 children going through. I think a lot of it has to do with the context. I think it's very possible to do in a classroom with all of your kids if you have everything prepped ahead of time and you have the art available. And of course, to use art in this way in a classroom is just wonderful. One of the other things that you can do if you want to make sure all the children have a chance to tell their stories and let everybody hear their stories, you could of course put them into different groups with different paintings and have kids sort of teach each other what their story is from each painting. So I think really it depends on your comfort level as a teacher. I think a lot of it depends on your context. Obviously, 30 kids going through a museum in one big group is maybe not the best.
No, we usually recommend about 10 to 15
that's
per
what I
group
would
in a
say.
museum. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that was good. But I think it's wonderful. One of the things that I like to do when I do presentations, either in a classroom or with a big group, is to make sure everybody has a piece of sketch paper with them and a pencil. And I ask them to sketch at different points of things that I say, as well as write down words. So by the time they're finished even with my presentation, and it's very interactive, the kids have got a little vocabulary of different words that they've maybe used to describe things. And they've got little sketches, and then I actually ask them to take those and turn them into bigger drawings if they want. So I think if you have to work with a lot of children because that's what your classroom has, you can do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do that at the museum too. We do a lot. We have a writing and art tour that we have for elementary, middle school, and sometimes high school students. And we use a lot of sketching and writing because, like we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that skill of being a visual thinker is so good for writing and reading. So, one other question
Yep.
for Barbara, is what is your experience with adult groups and maybe doing this kind of storytelling method?
Actually, adults are way more challenging, to be honest, because as I illustrated with my beginning story, Barbara, one of the problems is that we've tended to suppress our wonder a little bit and suppress our curiosity and our imagination, unless, of course, you're lucky enough to have a job like Chelsea and you're living with art every day, then so it often takes me a few minutes to warm people up. But to be honest, I do the exact same activities, obviously with a little bit of different focus with my questions, that I do with young people as I do when I work with older students, let's say. One of the things that I find is interesting is it's like I give people permission to just think about sort of from the heart and from the part of your head where you're not rationalizing quite so much. And I don't think we do that as much as we should as adults. One of my things that I'm always telling my students is I hate the phrase, "I can't imagine what that would be like," because I can, and you can too. It's like, yeah, think of, but we've gotten out of the habit as adults of imagining things on a regular basis. So usually when my students leave my classes, they know never to say that ever again, because no matter how awful or how wonderful it is, you can imagine it.
Absolutely, and actually, we often do kind of activities like this with adults, especially with teachers in our professional development programs. And it's almost you kind of have to give them permission to be creative again and say, this is a safe space. We're not going to judge each other. There's no right or wrong answers. It's kind of the beauty of a museum and the beauty of art and looking at art, that even though there are facts we can bring into the conversation at times, there's also so much we can just kind of give ourselves permission to play with mentally. So,
well, yeah, and one of the things that I noticed too, and if you remember the piece I just read, the spiders, when the kids destroyed them, they all sort of explode into charcoal, and kids understand quickly why that is. When I've done that reading a couple of times for adults, they don't always get that the reason it's exploding in charcoal and not blood and guts is because it's exploding in the medium in which the piece of art was created. And once they recognize that, then I find that children they want to know what are other ways that people make art. What are the things that they use? Because of course, with medieval manuscripts, you make all sorts. They want to know what made ink, and is this really goat skin that this manuscript was made out of, and all those kinds of things. So I think if you can find what the access point is, even for adults, that's the kind of thing that you begin to say, oh, I guess I'm not really reading this or viewing this as closely as I should, or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And it's that hook that kind of brings you in, for sure. So we have a bunch more questions,
Okay.
which is awesome. So I'm going to bring us to some next questions. So Jason Anne Marie asks, has anyone tried to create, paint, or recreate the imaginary painting that you mentioned that's at the center of the series?
Oh, no, but I would love someone to. I have my own squiggled version of it. And I think it was inspired a little bit by a William Blake scene from one of his illustrations of Milton's Paradise Lost. So if you're interested, Jason and/or Anne Marie, go for it. No one's done that. And the kids, I don't think I've had any. Kids tend to be fascinated with the beasts and want to create their own beasts. So that'd be great. I'd love to see what you thought it looked like.
All right, Jason and Marie, you've got a project. All right, and we have another question from Mary. As a general rule, do you find more inspiration from a simpler or a more complex painting? And do any other types of art inspire you, like sculptures or architecture?
just lost some sound there. So I got the simple or the
Oh, here
complex.
I can say it again. So,
Yeah.
as a general rule, do you find more inspiration from a more simple painting or a more complex painting? And do any other types of art inspire you, like sculptures or architecture?
Ah, yes. Let me just say that I think depending on the age of the children, less busy is probably easier if you want to point out some significant things. But as I mentioned before, one of the key paintings where the children animate and bring to life because they want to make a little extra money and they get in trouble for this is a Bruegel painting, and it's packed with stuff. And I found that kids all see different things and different stories and that. So again, I think it's up to the kind of child or the kind of reader or audience that you're looking at. And the follow up to that is what, remind me again, what was the
Yep. Do you find inspiration from other types of art than just paintings, like sculpture or architecture?
There is both, yes. I think we tried to make sure that we had that we helped our readers understand that it doesn't just have to be a painting. And there's a wonderful scene in the first book where they go down into a vault under the abbey, and this massive sculpture, sort of Greek or Roman sculpture, comes alive, and it's Pan with his little sort of recorder, and the sort of goat man comes alive in the abbey. So yes, they can animate sculptures and just about anything. So we've tried to vary what the kind of art that we've used.
Wonderful. All right. And then we have one other question from Jennifer, and we have a little bit of time left. So I think we're good to go if you all want to keep sending in questions. But Jennifer says she is a medieval illuminator recreationist, and so was immediately drawn into your books. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing so well in describing that. I'm very curious about what inspired the door locking mechanism in the old monastery.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you loved that.
And you may need to explain the door locking mechanism for those of us who, or
yeah,
folks who might not have read your book.
There's a scene in the monastery that where the scriptorium, and not every abbey or monastery during medieval times had such a formal place, but the scriptorium was where they stored their medieval manuscripts. And to get into this one, because it has sort of these enchanted manuscripts in them that the monks, the animary monks, have created, the young character from the medieval period in the book, Solon, he has to go through this elaborate process where he has to undo a couple of locks, the door flips, and then it flips again, and if you don't do things in a certain order, then the door is going to come down and crush you, which of course, if you're breaking into the room, that would happen. I don't know, I just thought it seemed like it couldn't be easy to get into this, and we had to have something that would make this a challenge. And I also am really interested in creating sort of parallels, and some readers get these, a lot of younger readers get them. And there's a wonderful scene at the beginning of the book where one of the characters, who's quickly murdered by something from a painting at the beginning of the first book, he's using his keypad to get through a series of doors to get underneath the National Gallery in London. And I thought it was a nice parallel to flash back to the Middle Ages and have Solon as a character in the Middle Ages doing his version of a handprint and a key card. And so, but instead of that, it's this elaborate sort of puzzle lock-in mechanism of a door. But I have to say that was one of my favorite scenes to actually write.
And I hadn't before thought about that parallel, but now that you've mentioned it, it's like, ooh, that is really cool. I love that kind of image of the two. Awesome. Yeah. And Jennifer, I want to say, if you're still tuning in, tweet us your images of your
Yes.
illuminations. I'd love to see them. You can use the hashtag Hangout with Art, or you can post it on the event page or on our Google Plus page. And I'd love to share them with folks watching. So please
I'd love to
do
see them
show
too.
us your work. Yeah, we want to
Yeah,
see it.
maybe I can get you to do a couple for me.
Awesome. So a couple of last questions for you, Carole, as we kind of wrap up. So as we talked about in the beginning, and as everyone knows who is watching who's participated in the course, one of our big goals is to get more comfortable in museums and looking at art. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you go to museums. When you go to a museum, do you have like a list that you're like, I gotta see this painting, or do you like to wander? Do you like to go in a group, or do you kind of like to have meditation time? And what do you try to take away from going to museums when you visit?
I'm going to divide that into two parts. If I'm going to a museum I've never been to for the first time, the first thing I do is I ask a docent or ask someone who works at the museum. I have an hour because a lot of times when I'm traveling or I'm doing book tours or whatever, I don't have much time, and I'll say, I have an hour. What should I not miss in your museum? And I have not yet been disappointed in asking someone. And so I think the first thing to do is I don't wander aimlessly. I'll usually ask, and then I'll get 5 things, and I'll go see those 5 things, and then if I have time, then I'll wander out from those 5 things. So I'll do that. So for first time, that's usually what I do.
Awesome. And I have to add in, as a museum person, we love it when people ask us questions like that. We love to share our favorite pieces or our highlights. So don't be afraid to ask folks, whether it's a security guard or someone at the admissions desk or someone with like an Ask Me pin or like an ID. You know, we love to talk about our collection. I think we're really nice, so definitely ask. Don't be afraid.
Well, and the other thing that I found in a few places, that person has gone with me, and I've gone because they've recognized I'm the first, I'm new to this, and they've taken me to the first couple of pieces and even given me their stories about them. So that has never failed me. I love to do that. But if I'm going to a museum I've been to before, and obviously, I'm a member of the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I come down on a regular basis, and I sometimes just come down for 1 or 2 things. And I will bring my notebook, and we are so lucky to have our museum sitting in such a stunning environment. And I love to sit under what I call the skeleton of the whale in our hallway, the Calatrava. I see that much more as a sort of a whale's skeleton. And so I like to sit under one of those little alcoves, and I'll read or I'll write, and then I'll just pick 2 or 3 pieces and go see them that are, pieces that are my favorite. I always like to do the exhibits because I trust that there's a reason why this exhibit has been brought to my community, and I want to see why that this is important. And it just even if I don't know anything, for example, about fashion or flowers or any of those kind of things, I will go because I figure I'm going to learn something that I can use somewhere. That's the problem with being. It's not really the problem with being a writer. It's the problem with being the friends or family member of a writer. Is everything is plot fodder.
I love that. That's great. Wonderful. And actually, I will send out this link and share it too. Jennifer just shared her her link to her creation, so we'll put it on Twitter and Google Plus. Thanks, Jennifer. I peeked at it and it's beautiful, so can't wait to share it with the group. And then I'm going to ask you one last question, Carole. And this is a question to kind of go forth from our hangout, all of our viewers, with this in mind. So, Carole, what advice do you have for someone who is just starting to look at art or go to museums?
Wow. Well, I think if you are just starting, then go take a tour at your local museum. Once you And if the money is an issue, find the day that your museum is open and supported by some foundation or grant money, and get the headphone set and wander with that, because it's like having a partner with you if you're by yourself. And again, think about, find out what if you don't want to ask someone because you might be a little embarrassed, Google it. Look up your art museum's website. Almost every art museum has its list of the famous things in its collection, and they may not be famous to you, but there's a reason why they're highlighted on that webpage. And so go in there. I also think see it as a place that you can have some sort of a respite from the real world. I used to love to take my kids when they were toddlers to the museum during the week when no one else was there very much during the day. And because you don't have to be quiet, it's not a sacred space. It's a space where you don't want to get too close to the art because you'll get in trouble, but you can wander around, you can talk, you can have a conversation. And I think if you let yourself not feel intimidated by the art and think about, again, the stories behind it and the stories you can tell from it, it's some of the best places to go on a cold wintry afternoon, I'm telling you. It's better than binging on a TV show at times, I think, as much as I like to do that. But really, see it
for both.
Yes, there is. Yeah. I also think the other thing that I tend to do in museums that are new for me is I go to the gift store, because I often find in the gift store they've highlighted some things that are maybe even like little knickknacks or cards. I always leave my art museum with cards. I have them everywhere in my office. I use them for inspiration, and they're wonderful treats to give to young people. Yep. They're wonderful treats to give to young people as rewards in classes, and they're not very expensive for teachers to afford. So I guess my advice would be get down to your museum. And if you've not been there in a while, go tomorrow.
I love that. Yeah, and I have to say, I think, postcards are so great. What we sometimes even say to do is, even if you're visiting for the first time, go, this is not in our collection, it's a great little painting from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Go to the gift store and just, even with your family or friends, pick like 3 or 4 postcards of things you want to see, and then ask someone to help you find them. And it can be kind of a great map almost to help you look at the museum in a different way. And I love your suggestions of using the museum for different purposes. Most museums have a cafe, as you were talking about, like come and chill out, take a breather after you've been walking all around. Use it as a homework space or a writing space. We love that. Most museums have free Wi-Fi nowadays, so Absolutely. We're all about like Google in the galleries and, work away in our cafe and, be in these lovely spaces. And it is so true that you can absolutely talk in art museums. Don't touch stuff in art museums, but yes, talk. I'm here to say that is okay. Good,
because it's hard to keep me quiet. And so when I'm there with my students, I'm often, I've got a little crowd of people moving with us that may or may not have been with us when we started. But the other thing is, one of the things you could do with cards, and I used to do with my kids, I would give them to it when they got a little older, and I'd send them off by themselves to find the painting and do like a scavenger hunt with the cards. And almost every museum has an educational center. The Cole Center at our museum is awesome. I love to go there and make a piece of art and bring it home when I leave.
Absolutely, yeah. And to that point, there's lots to do for lots of different audiences, too. We have great family programs. As Carole knows, she's helped us out in family programs a lot and comes to our studio, which we love. And all museums have some kind of a family programs. There's young professional programs, kind of late night programs, lots and lots of
Art
different...
with wine is always good.
Art with wine. Who could argue with that? No one. So we're about at the end of our time with Carole. It just zipped by, and we had so many wonderful questions. So thanks to all of you who tuned in for asking questions. And Carole, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. I love it. I'm going to come down soon with some students, I think.
Great. Bring them on down.
I will.
Perfect. And so just for all of you watching, we'll have another Hangout next week on Tuesday the 14th, same time, same place, 1 p.m. Central Time, and we'll be talking about art and history with 2 historians who use art in their work as historians. And actually one of them is a colleague of Carole. Her name is Jody Eastberg. And we also have Philip Naylor from Marquette University here in Milwaukee. So we hope that you'll you'll all come and join us. And again, please feel free to tweet, join us on Google+. The hashtag is Hangout with Art, and let us know what you thought of today's talk. And I will also post Jennifer's links to her beautiful manuscript.
I can't wait to see them. Thank you.
I know, they're great. And I'll also post links to all of the artwork that Carole mentioned in her talk so that you can see them online. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.